connectionslab.org.
One thing that I've noticed in this last 6 months to a year has been that after 20 some years of this, of doing this, I know Antonia's been at it longer than I have, and that this kind of messaging has always been kind of like pulling teeth to get people to do it. And now it's kind of taken off. People are doing it. Some of you have been on Antonia's webinars when she does them. Also, her Substack is doing very well. I am a paid member as of today, I will say. And also we see ASO, or not Schenker Osorio. She's has done a lot with the race class narrative and has gotten some funding and worked with a lot of different groups. That seems to be taking off. I don't see a substantive difference between the form of the message you make with race class narrative than all the things we've been talking about with a truth sandwich and a values sandwich. But it's nice to see the work of George Lakoff making it out there into the world. Let's all just turbocharge this. To paraphrase Paul Wellstone, we all message better when we all message better. Just saying, those of you in Minnesota know Paul Wellstone. And we already mentioned Antonia and her Substack articles, but seriously, if you are not checking her Substack out, you are missing out on an absolutely golden opportunity to learn her updated, extended, and bold articles on messaging. It's really exciting stuff. I get a thrill when I read it because I'm just going, yes, that's it. Says it better. That's the Eric Clapton in Antonia playing her Substack guitar. And so seriously, don't miss it. From what I can see, most of the articles she writes are out there for everybody on the free one, although I encourage you to become a member. If we can't support each other, what the heck, what are we going to do? So that's good. I will pop the link to her thing into the chat right now. And then I'm going to throw in another freebie that I just got out of one of Antonia's articles, which I've been wrestling with this, and so is Hobie, who's been on this. And he's a climate messenger and also absolute virtuoso at it. And, what do you call it? It was global warming. Frank Luntz, as Antonia points out in her article, the evil genius of the GOP and the author of the GOPAC memo and the turn of Republicans from being just like regular old politicians to being just shut down the Democrats, don't become friends or anything. Well, he decided climate change was better because global warming was working well, and God's climate's always changed, things like that. And then for a while, I was thinking climate crisis was good, but the problem with climate crisis is it makes you feel like nothing, well, it's a crisis, it's huge. Can I do anything about it? It may make people want to give up. Antonia frames this as climate challenge. It's the best I've heard yet. A challenge is something you rise to, that you want to do. Pour an ice bucket over your head, whatever you consider a challenge. I like that. So I wanted to pass that on because we have people, and why lose this opportunity? So anyway, everybody's experienced in GOTV. So the nuts and bolts of organizing are not what we're going to talk about tonight. I went out, did a little research on the web and other places, looking for things that said something about the messaging and the approaches that we do that were based in research. I won't say that that I've checked out the actual journal articles or whatever on the research. I will say that what I saw is kind of in line with what I've been seeing in psychological literature up to now, and then I'll have some suggestions of my own just based on years of being in organizing and, at the state level, congressional district and others. So we'll do that. But so let's take a quick look. I'll start my thing here and share the screen. So let's start out with what you can do by saying what doesn't work. And in this case, here's an example. And I've said this before, and it's usually met with blank stares from voters. Can we count on your vote for Bill Smith? And usually they're looking at me like, I just met you. What are you talking about? But it turns out that the research says that starting a GOTV message about a specific candidate turns out to be no more effective than not contacting voters at all. That's a pretty bold statement. I'd probably like to see some other information on it, but it kind of makes sense. And it's actually really not all that great of a message. However, what is better is, will you be a voter on election day? You probably heard this before. And being a voter really focuses on the person's self-image and on their behavior, and brings up in their minds a picture of themselves being a voter. And so this is, well, we'll look into that just a little bit more in a moment. So how do we get people to this place where we can get them thinking about voting? And some of it, or really the heart of the matter, is creating dissonance. And people throw the term cognitive dissonance around quite a bit. It's, I'd say, probably 70% used incorrectly. Leon Festinger, who came up with this originally, he basically said, and I'll simplify it a bit, but that word and deed need to be in alignment or there is dissonance. So say you publicly commit to vote. Since the brain seeks to reduce dissonance, you'll experience dissonance until you actually go and vote. And, you could, as a lot of people do, choose to skip voting by rationalizing that you had a good reason. But if you told somebody that you would vote, then it gets a lot harder not to do it. So here's my next slide here. Okay. There we go. So here are some things you can do to create that dissonance. I mean, we're not talking about making people's heads explode like in Scanners. We're just, if anybody's old enough to have seen that stupid movie, what we're talking about is just getting people to feel this maybe a slight bit uncomfortable by getting them to do a few things. One is just simply get them to say they'll vote. If you can do this without asking a yes or no question, even the better, but that works too. But will you be a voter on election day is one way to do it. This has been around for a while. It's still pretty powerful. At the very least, as you're getting your volunteers to go out into the world to do this, try to, there isn't a whole lot you're going to be able to tell them. We're not going to retain everything, but if they retain that, that's simple enough to remember. If you've got a little more time with the voter, you can ask them why they value voting. And this is a great way to put voting into a moral dimension in their brains. Moral frames are deep, fundamental frames, and they really reflect who we are as moral beings. Therefore, to not vote goes against who they are. And that's some powerful dissonance mojo, just saying. This one I've seen before, and actually we talked about it just as right before we got on here. Get them to sign a pledge to vote. The act of signing is an explicit commitment, and people don't like to break their word. What I find interesting about it, this is something back in when I was in school for psychology, I had very much in the learning or how people learn, and in that area, and in cognitive psychology. And it turns out that a case can be made that no learning takes place without muscle movement. And it doesn't matter really what muscle or how much, just that there's some muscle movement. And it seems really weird, but one example is, what's the first thing you do when you can't remember how to spell a word? You grab a pencil and you write it down. Your hand knows how to do it. But anyway, all of that comes back to if people are signing a pledge, it's an overt act. It's an explicit commitment. It's one that creates a visual picture, a physical, muscular, kinesthetic picture in their brain. All of that stuff helps to kind of, solidify that action in their brain. And so that should make it a little harder for them not to go vote. And then this one we do hear about, and we tell our voters or our volunteers all the time, get them to walk through their plan for the day they'll vote. This paints that picture in their mind again of physically carrying out the steps. Have them include when, where, how they'll get there, and what they would be doing beforehand. I mean, obviously you don't always have all the time for this, but if you do, this is a great way to do it. Taking them through this mental rehearsal actually activates motor parts of the brain. And so that's a good thing. It's also a catalyst to remind them that they might need to get a babysitter, things like that, or put gas in the car. So using these techniques, when election day comes and they hesitate, they're more likely to go through it. And it's not everybody, but we're talking percentage points here. If we can get the more percentage points we get, better off we're going to be. Okay, so next slide is, here's something I cribbed out of something that I looked at in research. And let's talk about these. It's like, why do people vote, and how can we leverage that in their messages? What kind of things get them to vote and motivate them? Identity is one. They should see voting as a noble part of their character. And the asking, will you be a voter, is that kind of a thing. It hits who they are as opposed to, will you be voting, which focuses on what they'll do. So there's that. One thing that showed up was, curiously, the effect happens to be much higher for people who live alone than for people who don't. That was interesting. And then, go ahead. Somebody have a question? Okay. And social norms, not surprisingly, social norms, it basically, this is kind of all the cool kids are doing it, lots of people are voting, everyone's voting, so you should too. And as opposed to not a lot of people voting, but you should. So it's a little difference in tone there. And people don't like to stand out, and I get that. Perhaps not surprisingly, this works best for people who vote infrequently. And this is preferred over the pleading and less effective. We have low voter turnout, so we need you to get out there and do this. Get them, let them know that this is what people do. Also, social pressure is similar. Studies do show that it's effective. It's kind of the bandwagon approach. Again, all the cool kids are doing it deal. Another way is to note that the voting record is public. I've seen this before. I'm not sure what I think about it, but apparently it does motivate people. Most people don't know that the voting record is public. And of course, the record notes only that you did vote and not who you voted for. If it's a primary, it'll say what party you voted for in a primary state. Some messages go so far to say, and I've actually seen this message, and this one gave me the creeps, we'll know if you voted because we'll check up on you later. I actually saw that come in a message to me, and I was shocked. I think it's creepy. Personally, I don't recommend it for that reason. And I know when I've even mentioned that to somebody, they looked at me, and it was like my mom, and she was an Italian grandma. And when she looked at me and I was doing something wrong, I knew it. So, but of course, if you do go down that road, you better be prepared to answer the question, how do you know that? It can get kind of tricky. And some of the conclusions of this research are still open or controversial, but what I see running through it all is consistent with other psychological research we've been exploring in the webinars. Getting voters to focus on their commitments and their plan for voting makes it more likely they will consciously or unconsciously avoid cognitive dissonance and vote. I think it also builds an ongoing identity of a proud voter if all of us, when we're out in the field, are reinforcing that idea that being a voter is important. So let's move on to, in effect, the anatomy of a narrative. And I cribbed these two slides from the message briefing today that we got. The group keeps changing its name. The person who's most often involved in this is Anat Schenker Masario. And she's the person with the race class narrative. And this is the structure of her narrative. Again, this is very similar to the truth sandwich we've been talking about. And in here, the start with an opening on shared values, and this can be, we all want our children to be safe when they go to school, something along that line. The next part is important, and this is something that Antonia has been very strong on, and ASO has, but the idea of naming the villains. We can't be afraid to call out the Republicans. In fact, it's important that we do, so that we create contrast and difference. But name the villains, and And
Actually, I do not actually subscribe to that view, and
sorry.
yeah, that's a complicated point,
Okay.
but I think that is especially, I mean, you can say like some people this or but to me, anytime if you say, oh, Republicans, this, like, if you're talking to a swing voter, the part of them that's Republican is going to bristle and push back at that. So I have very mixed feelings about this. I think it really depends on how it's done. Like, if, I mean, I think that I don't know, that's a further conversation, but I think you have to be very, very careful about how you go about doing it.
Okay, good. Good to know. Thanks. There are, yeah, I mean, I hear you on that. I know we talk about a number of things. I always learn a little bit here and there on this. Well, that's this approach. And in this approach, the idea is to call out, this is kind of the violation of our values thing that we do in the value sandwich. And that's another way to do it, rather than specifically calling out the Republicans. You can say, but some people say, this is what, that, or some people, want to take away our freedoms or whatever, but, or show where a policy violates a value. And then there's this idea of emphasizing unity and collective action to achieve victory. And then you connect this all together, where you connect everyone together to achieve the desired outcomes and to talk about our vision. And so this is just another one. An example of this is, here we go. In America, we value our freedoms, freedom to retire in dignity, decide whether and when we grow our families, and know our kids will make it home safe. So we open with a shared value, which Republicans share too. There's nothing in there I think Republicans would disagree with. But Trump Republicans, so it is, ASO is different on this, and she calls out Trump Republicans, or MAGA extremists, want to take away our freedoms, ending Social Security and Medicare, outlawing abortion, blocking gun safety. So they're trying to scare us with false claims about where Democrats stand on crime. And then reminding voters of the victory we've had before, just like in 2020, we see through their lies. And the last one, we will vote for Democrats to protect our freedoms, our families, and our futures. So it's but I think but in any case, how you do this is that format of opening with your values, and then showing where there's a violation of values, and then coming back, enlisting people to join with us, and then restate the values we have and the action that we want to make that happen. And so there, and I would maybe in January, we can get Antonia back as a guest, and we'll go over some of this and some other things. We'll talk.
George, Ron has a question.
Ron?
Thank you. I have a question. George, you and I have talked about this a little bit,
Yep.
But I haven't heard from Antonia, so maybe from both of you. I'm a big believer in compare contrast pieces, and I'm working on one for each of three candidates right now, all rural candidates, close races. So do you each have comments on putting together, never negative, but what I do is I talk about votes and quotes. What did they do? What did they say? That's it. Compare, contrast. Which, the end product is my person's good, the other person's bad, but you have to come up with that yourself by just looking at what I put in front of you.
Well, the one thing I can say is what you don't want to do is in any way, when you do this, use their words and be very careful that what it is you're saying isn't in their frame. So we've talked about this before, where much of, if not all of the Republican messaging is bait. In fact, those of you who fish know that Republicans believe in chumming also. I mean, chumming is somebody dumps a bucket of bait over the side just to attract fish to the boat. But they bait us all the time, and they don't really care whether they prove themselves right or not. That's not the point. The point is to get you to respond. And when you respond, you're in their frame. This, and Antonio, you can talk about this. This is, I guess kind of what I was saying before is Antonia's written a bunch on controversy and being bold in how you do it. Maybe you want to pick it up from there. Is that cool? Can I ask you to do that?
Yeah, contrast. There's a lot of evidence that like attack content doesn't work, but contrasting does work. But you have to really focus on what you believe and why it's good. And then a lot of it has to do with tone rather than just being like, oh, they're a bad person. Or, as George pointed out, the last thing you want to do is be like, oh, they're horrible because they said this about me, or they said this about us, when all you're doing is then spreading that message that they're putting out. So what's important is that you present the situation from your moral perspective. Like, here's what I believe is right. Then you can say, here is where, I believe this opponent. And the thing is, if you do it respectfully, you're not going to trigger a backlash from swing readers. If you do like kind of blanket condemnation or condescension or like so-and-so's an idiot or whatever, that's just gonna come back at you. But if you just say, look, I support public schools because they provide every child with a good education, not just those who can afford to pay, whatever, and then you say, my opponent or so-and-so doesn't seem to believe that that's important, or is supportive of taking money out of the schools for other reasons, or but you don't. Like you said, the votes and quotes is good because you're not slinging names. You're just saying they do this or they did that. But you also have to make sure that you're explaining why whatever they're saying or doing doesn't support the values you think are important in that situation. So a lot of what we do is just show people what they're doing and then go to see,
yeah,
as if everybody saw it the way that we did, as if everybody already had our interpretation. So a lot of it
reason to the same conclusion.
Obvious, of just like pointing out what it is about what they're doing that goes against what you believe, but doing it sort of politely.
So to move.
Question, Ron?
Yeah, if I could just follow that up, which George already knows this, and Lisa, but Antonia, when I'm talking literally with thousands of voters in their living room, on their porch, or somehow verbally, I'll ask them the operative question, as I did with Amy, my around the corner neighbor who was running for president. It's, please tell me, what is the number one issue priority for you and your family? And then I'm quiet. And 80% of the time they say healthcare, prescription drugs. So one of my follow-ups is, gee, and I notice you have a so-and-so sign on your lawn. Or they'll tell me later in the conversation, yeah, I'm supporting so-and-so. And I'll say, well, did you know that so-and-so voted against your interest, A, B, and C these times? And I'll just ask them that. I'm not attacking them. I'm not being negative. I'm just giving them, votes of the votes in quotes so that they can compare that with their own values. And it's been very effective for me.
I would just add the one recommendation that it's not just about their interests, because we know from the cognitive science data that people don't actually vote on self-interest as much as they vote on caring about the people around them. So when somebody says healthcare, and I'm sure that like kind of everybody feels this way in some sense. They're kind of like, horrible things can happen to me. And like, I mean, to a certain extent, I can handle that because, it's only me being hurt. But like my kids, if something happens to my kids and I can't take care of that, or my mom or my spouse or something, people are usually motivated more by what it means for how they're able to take care of the people around them. So don't think of it in terms of like, you want this and it's in your best interest to vote for so and so. Put it in terms of, this matters to you. You care about this because you care about the people in your life. And so believes that caring about this is important, or so, but like you want them to feel like the person you want them to vote for shares their values. And then you can say like, I don't really understand why dude on your lawn sign would vote against something like this. I mean, does he not think it's important that, people, that people with insulin, people who are insulin dependent, can survive without going broke, so talk about it in terms of not what's in your best interest or you getting what you want or them getting what they want, but presume that that person has a positive moral reason for whatever it is that they're believing in, and convince them that your candidate shares that moral motivation, and then question why the opposing candidate does not.
And that kind of pushes into another direction. This idea that I mean, there are times we need to talk about the opponents, but the other thing, and Antonia's talked about this recently, about creating controversy. And so that question, what, does this candidate, actually believe that these aren't good things, or whatever and there's more to it. I'd really like to explore more at some point with you, Antonia, because it's very powerful. Because the idea is it is a way of shifting the frame to put things where we're at, based on the fact that the Republicans have been doing it to us for 50 years now. We haven't caught on until recently. And Antonia is going, well, just no reason we can't turn it back around on them. We don't have to out and out lie to people. We just come out and ask some questions that are tough questions for them, but that are in our frame, so that we pull people to think about it in our frame, get them out of the Republicans' frame as quickly as possible. So whenever you mention Republicans, you want to be out of their frame. So,
George, before you move on, there was a question in the chat about what does a pledge document look like, and I pulled one up. So I'll just share my screen, and you can do it.
I
think
Yep, you got it.
Okay. So this one, there's a bunch of them online, but this one happens to be for students, and this is one you'd hand to somebody. So what it looks like is it's a card that then somebody thinks about what they want to vote about. Then you can gather some information about them, see if they want to volunteer. But then they would also sign this, and by doing things like this, they've written it down, like George says, and have committed to something. So they're more likely to do something about it. And of course, in this particular case, this person will be contacted. I've seen some online as well, like you can use them online at different sites and things like that. But then I also have a question, because in Brooklyn Park here, we're going to be doing a bike ride on October 15th, and we were going to do a voter registration. And some people are saying, well, it's kind of late, but for people who haven't registered to vote, actually it's we have then 4 days to get them down to the county after that, because I think October 19th is the last day to get them down to the county. Otherwise you have to do same day voting, which we have here in Minnesota, or same day voter registration. But I'm thinking that even just filling out that voter registration is something that okay, I'm a voter. What do you think, George?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I would think that that a voter registration is probably a reasonable proxy for a pledge card, especially if you're there with them and saying, "Will you vote?" Either with that or with the information they need to do same day voting. But the card is pretty good. You could have both. No reason you couldn't have both. There's a pledge card. Oh, you're not registered? Here's your registration information, and great, go ahead. I got to get another one of these cards back to the office. I'll sign that baby.
Okay.
So,
Greg has a question or a
Yep.
comment.
Yeah, it's so I've seen pledge cards where it's actually a postcard and it gets mailed back to the voter and reminds them that they signed this pledge card, and with the the facts about the voter. I think maybe Obama did that, or that's a pretty nice way to do it too.
yeah, I like that idea. It's because especially because they get the same card back, so they remember that they signed it, and it's their signature. So they have to be true to themselves, I guess. I like that. All right, let me move on. This is a little bit more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing, but some ideas that came up. There we go. Okay. So I've always tried to think when I'm doing anything, this whole thing started when I went out and saw people volunteering and going, how in the world can they be effective out there? And so I've always kind of thought of ways we can make them more effective. And that's what got me going on the messaging, because everybody's seen scripts. I don't know if anybody's ever seen a good one, but so there's that. But this here, when our volunteers go out here to do GOTV, they need a few things. One is they need to bring an effective message with them, whether that's a simple thing for some of the volunteers who aren't going to get more in depth, just simply asking people if they're going to be a voter, or somebody else being more prepared. That's great. But also having voting location and hours. These things are more and more able to be found out before you go out. I believe the van will print these things if you tell it to. And so that would be good. I know we all hate the van, but we should use it. And remember, if we don't put data in, we don't get data out. And then voter registration forms, and then the ways to vote, the ways to register also. But make sure people know how they can do it. And then obviously you want to make sure you have a phone number so that you can either call somebody or have them call somebody to get a ride on election day. And then I was just going to show you this, which we do in our little Senate district here in Minnesota. And this was developed by a guy named Mark Goodell. And Mark, we started doing this a few years ago, and it's been pretty, near as we can tell, it's been pretty effective. But the research does say that the single most effective way to get people to vote all the way down the ballot is a sample ballot. And so that's a problem we have, and I don't know that we paid as much attention to it as we should. But some, if not a lot of people come in and they vote for president or governor, 4 or 5 candidates that they recognize, and then they don't vote on the other ones. I mean, I go down, when I look at all the judges, I go down there and go, okay, let's see. Well, I don't know who these people are. There's a woman, vote for a woman because we need more women judges, and things of that sort. But having a sample ballot is a real good idea. Now, some of them, if I know you probably in whatever state you're in, you can get a sample ballot with the state party that your unit buys into. But those don't always include the down ballot candidates, and they're also a little bigger. This particular one here is small enough to fold up and stick in your wallet, which I think is a great idea. It's also easy to take a picture of. So if you're texting or phone banking on to a cell phone, you can send them this picture and they have it. But this is one we print up because the state parties are ones are pretty big and just not complete. So that's an example of it. And on the back side, I would like to see maybe some messaging, but there's not a lot of room here. The next one is if I can get it to go here. Come on. Why won't it go? I don't know. It's kind of working, but it hasn't been. Okay, there we go. Okay. This has, how to vote by mail, how to vote early in person, and how to vote on election day. And that's okay. I think that's information you can put on there, or you can bring with you And then maybe the sample ballot can have, a good message on the other side. But, you can leave these as literature drops. You can text them, social media, whatever. And it's a good idea to have these on hand, because nowadays with early voting, this is good to have before early voting starts, and carry these around. So we print them up, we stick them in the office, and encourage all of the volunteers to bring them with. So anyway, those are just a couple of hints that I thought I'd throw out there for you. And that's it. So any questions, anything?
I wanted to throw out there that I read something recently that people are afraid to vote wrong. So if they don't really know about a certain, like we might be like, we'll pick all the women judges just because we figured better to try something. A lot of people just don't vote if they don't know why they're voting for somebody. So supposedly that I'm a big fan of sample ballots. Also, I'm going to chuck into the chat some postcard scripts. They're just like little 2-line things that are what I call partisan positive GOTV messaging. And these were involved in a campaign that got a 2.37 point increase in turnout among low turnout strong Dem voters into the 2018 midterms. So, you can see the gist of it. It's just sort of like, it's specific about the individual issues. It's just like, positive. It's partisan, but it's kind of general and positive, and it worked surprisingly well.
Yeah, and I'm also looking at your comments in there, and I guess it's just a general concern, or at least question I've had about focus groups or some of the testing that gets done. There, I guess, how does that really turn out in the real world? Or as you mentioned, those are just about that specific terminology, and there's other terminology that could be better. And
I recently had access to some polling data by a prominent DC firm that was testing different messages. And then they would say, well, this is this message, and this is the progressive message, and the progressive message was like this really badly framed romantic it was almost like a bad stereotype of progressive message. And they were like, well, the progressive message doesn't work at all. And I'm like, but it's a terrible message. And to say that, you test 4 different messages with 4 different approaches, and one of them is really well written and the other one is terribly written, of course you're going to get that result.
Yeah.
It's true. Like you have a lot of traditional firms that do this polling, and when they might try a couple different approaches, but they're not really cognizant enough of how they're saying things to usually what they do is test a progressive, which is what they view as a sort of like lefty language moralizing kind of version of it, versus a moderate kind of centrist message, which is sort of like apologizing, like trying to couch it in conservative values. To me, both of those suck. So that's typically what they're testing. So when somebody says, oh, this is poll tested language that, is demonstrated to have worked, it's like, well, what were the options? So just take it with a grain of salt.
I suppose the very same thing could be said for the polls.
Usually the stuff that Anat and those guys, she's very good. So it is, and you're right, ASO is the polling is done with Lake Research, with the Linda Lakes group. So like 90% of the time it's really good. I have seen the back end on some of it, and every now and then, but ASO's work with them is better than the rest of the work that they're doing. Well, I'll just say that.
Um,
So most of the time, I would say her stuff can be the data she's putting out in this group, this discussion group, is generally pretty darn good.
I've got two things. First off, I'm not familiar with ASO, so I guess I need to learn about ASO. And the other thing is what you were talking about, Antonio, is basically how to use better use A/B testing. And I don't know if you do that or.
I don't have much of an occasion to, really. I could, I probably should, but I don't have a lot of opportunity to do that right now. Yeah, and there's a group, I don't know what they're called. Yeah, they keep changing their name, but they have these weekly or bi-weekly phone, these like huge phone meetings. They usually like, every Monday or yeah, but I think that what you'd see, like we saw one of her message things up there, and it's like, I think the difference that I see, I think the stuff she's doing is very good, but I just like to help people understand on a deeper level what our perspective is, so that rather than just using like one or two words, that we can talk freely and openly from our perspective that gets people to see things the way we do. It's not just about throwing out a word or, it's about really fleshing out a whole different way of looking at things. So, but yeah, the work that they're doing is really good.
Yeah, I would say there's a difference in approach to the training that Antonia and I do, and that some other groups do. And more people are getting trained in this, which is good. But and I don't want to generalize, but on the movement briefings, which is what they call these, a lot of it is, here's your fish. And I'm overgeneralizing. There is some good explanation. It's always good to hear a not speak. And I did put a link to her outfit in the chat, and I'm looking for the thing for the messaging. I'll get that to you if I find it here, or Lisa will get it out in the follow-up.
I'll make sure I'll find it and get it to you in the follow-up. It is confusing because it doesn't just come from one place. It's like there's a multitude of organizations that are involved in this. So I'll dig into it and see if I can find how to get to the movement briefing.
But there's that idea that we've kind of always taken our focus has always been on people who are leaders and who are, Uber volunteers, people who've been around for a while, and who are the people who are going to be in a position to get their people in their organization trained. Although certainly we've had plenty of people come in, just off the street, which is great. But so we think it's important that people know why this happens and how you do it, and understand it. The more you do it, the more you pick up, it all starts coming together. Your brain is less like Swiss cheese and when you started, which is what we wanted. And so we kind of do that. I do think there's a lot of value also in having some ready-made messages on things. I think that's good. But we just take this different approach, and it's fun, especially because we meet other people who have been doing this for a while and always have good things to say when we come in on the webinars here. So
I'm posting the link to the registration sign up for the webinar for the movement briefings.
Oh, okay, there it is. Okay.
And then you wait. So I would recommend that you go ahead and sign up, and then you'll get whatever material that they send out in advance and links and all sorts of stuff. And
ASO, Greg, to answer your question, if we didn't, is not Schenker Osorio or Osorio. Yeah. Person does it. So, and I see it's in the chat.
And again, I'll make sure that, thanks for posting that, Antonia. And I will, I grabbed it and I'll make sure that it's in the recap email too.
Any other questions, comments? Well, I would ask everybody, especially because we'll, with kind of shutting down until after the election, or probably after, through the holidays. Uh, we really miss in our which we get in our in-person workshops, because in those workshops we can sit people down and put an evaluation form in front of them, and then they get embarrassed if they don't fill it out. And so that's hard to do here. And we really miss getting the kind of feedback we had. I know all the workshops we did in Minnesota and Michigan and in a few other places nearby, we always changed what we were doing. We always found good ideas. So we would really like it if you can let us know what worked and what didn't. Also, let us know what kind of things you might want to see, because I really want to kick back here and see how we can be more effective and reach more people. And a lot of that has to do with what it is that people want. So please email us, when we send the email. Yes.
Connie has a question.
Okay.
Oh, hi. It's sort of a comment and maybe a plea for help. I've been active with the Democrats in Washington State and the Seattle area for a number of years. I'm a precinct committee officer. I canvassed my own precinct at least before the COVID. I canvassed my own precinct before the primary and before the general, and then I would volunteer for precincts that didn't have precinct committee organizers. And in addition to that, and my husband does that too, and I feel that they've never, I feel they've never given me good material to canvass with, never good messaging. I've struggled after that on my own. I guess I've done, and that's why I attend meetings like this. I'm getting less and less. I'm feeling more and more. I just need some support. I just hate feeling that I'm, fighting against really bad support all the time. And now my husband has already jumped into canvassing in other precincts, and he's doing, all the Dems have asked the canvassers to do is say, are you going to vote? Are you going to support our candidates? And didn't you say at the beginning, can we count on you to vote for the Democrats? And didn't you start out by saying that's one of the least effective things you can do? Mm-hmm. I'm so discouraged. Although I have to say, the precinct committee officer support person in the 43rd District Democrats, where I am, has kept tabs of voting. And he says that my precinct is one of the votes at about the highest level of any other precinct. So what I'm doing is sort of okay, I guess, but I feel as if I could do better. And I want to do better, and I want to be supported in this.
Yeah, I hear you. One thing I can say is you are someone actually doing something in precincts. I know in Minnesota here, and Ron's been around long enough to know this too, but and others, that there was a time where we had a whole precinct revitalization process because nothing was happening in the precincts. And after the process, nothing was happening in the precincts. So you're doing something. That's great. I know there are things that people think ought to be going on in precincts, but I have my own feeling on it after being a congressional district chair and being involved in a lot of on the ground organizing. Really at the precinct level, not just for the voters, but also for the volunteers who happen to live there. Really what we ought to be doing between elections is we ought to be building community. And it almost doesn't matter how you do that. A woman here who I went to Camp Wellstone with, some people might know what that is, but we went back in 2005, and when you come out of there, you have to have a thing that you're going to do. And so I did a newsletter. This other woman, or this woman said she set up these great. They were meetings once a month where you'd go and have pizza and maybe beer and sit around and listen to a speaker, right? Notable people in the state would come by. She was able to get all sorts of good speakers. A lot of these people just love to come out and do this. And she created a community, and it went so well in our congressional district. We ended up having across the congressional district, which is probably 12, 14 Senate districts, sub-districts. We had 8 or 10 of these things going every month for a few years. And she ended up turning it into a nonprofit. She still does it. And not with as many local groups, but boy, did that bring people together. Because first off, a lot of people don't want to come to a precinct event or something else if they think they're going to be asked to phone bank or door knock or do something, right? But you get them in there for a bean feed. You get them in there to watch a movie, whatever it is. There are all sorts of political movies. You can get one of those and get a projector out there and have some beers out on the lawn. And what happens is you build this community. People have relationships beyond what they're doing on the ground. And then when it comes time to get people to volunteer to do stuff, it's a lot harder for them to say no to somebody that they know. And especially if there are other people in the group, because it's like, well, I don't want to say no. I'm not going to help.
Somebody looking that direction at all is always dangerous, but yeah, I suppose with.
So what's this?
It's the Democratic training for.
I thought it was a question.
No, he was talking to somebody else.
Okay. But yeah, so but what I do here is a challenge to maybe come up with something that you can do at your precinct meetings that would move people to better messaging, if I'm getting you right.
Yeah. Yes, I wish I could do that. And
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay. So I have to say that our precinct, our 43rd District Democrats, they're all volunteers who have busy, the officers and, are volunteers who have busy lives, and they're doing the best they can already, I feel. But I think that if I can make a good case, I could get someone interested in helping me with messaging. And then help me to reach out to other and maybe make some change.
Sure.
This again, which Democrats?
43rd District Democrats in Seattle.
We were out there for the ASDC meeting, and we were so unhappy to hear that Tina, your party chair, had COVID during that time. We were looking forward to meeting her. She's something else.
Oh yes, she's she's making the change that we need for sure. But it's hard. It's hard work for her. I know that. I've attended fundraisers that she's spoken at and other meetings, and it's clear it's quite hard what she's trying to do.
I would not want to be a party chair for a state.
Yeah.
So,
So thanks for that hint about building community. So one thing that I have done that I think helps a little bit. Whenever I go canvas, I bring with me a quarter pager. They call it a green sheet here. It's my own comments about the upcoming election, and also I reintroduce myself every time. And at the end, I always say thanks for being a voter, and I give my contact information. So I make myself. It's kind of become, another PCO said that's become my brand, and I've established a pretty good brand by doing this. That helps somewhat, but to make people trust me and and be more engaged. One person told me that in my precinct told me that she looks forward to those quarter pages every year.
Yeah.
But so if no one comes to the door, I still have my effort is not wasted, because I leave that at the door. So they've had contact, they've had some contact with me.
That is cool. Yeah, I like that idea. And I know that that's a lot of work too, but
it is, but it's worth it. I mean, I feel as if I get somewhere with that, and instead of just handing out candidate brochures that people don't want to read.
Yeah. What I have been thinking about doing is, and because when we do these webinars, they're an hour, And if questions go on, hour and a half, and we have recorded them all. You can certainly go and use those if you wanted to get a group of people together and watch one. Although I don't, I think they can be interesting, but watching somebody else's Zoom may not be. But I've wanted to go back through those and pull the content out and do shorter videos. And that might be something that might work for what you're talking about, because it'd be something that you can get together with other people, either in person or on Zoom, and watch the video and talk about it, things of that sort. So, I'm thinking about more things to do with that. That's another reason why I don't think we'll start back up until January, because I need some time to do that. And I want to get some more stuff going with Antonia. I don't know if she knows that yet, but we do. So,
oh yeah, I mean, it takes so much time to write the darn newsletters that I'm not doing, a tiny fraction of what I need to be doing to do outreach to people, because like local Democratic Party groups are like it is my mission to help every Democrat that's out there talking to people, everybody who's producing content. That is who I'm trying to reach. And it's a little frustrating because I just haven't. I've got to figure out how to not have it take like a week to 10 days to write one newsletter, because otherwise I'm never going to get it out there. But like short videos I want to do. And like I was, even as we're talking, I was thinking like I would love it if people would send me content they're working on and just say like, what's going on here framing wise?
right.
What can you tell me about this? I would be delighted to do that. And like, anybody who's involved in a local party organization, anything like just, I would like to be able to do more to help out, and also to find out just exactly what it is that would be useful to you. Because if you're out there canvassing and you're like, what I really need is this, like, I know you're giving me all this other stuff, but like what would be really a practical value would be something that looks like this, then I can do that. I just don't know what that is at the moment. I should, but I don't always know. But
well, and that's why it's important that we get feedback.
Yeah.
If we get feedback from people about what they think could be useful, send it on. Any way we can help out, why not?
But what Antonia just said, I'm going to go back to what she was talking about earlier at the beginning, where she's got ideas within her writing. So I propose that possibly you ask your readership to maybe take on some of these your parenthetical or sidebar things, and get maybe some community things going on. You never know. I'm not volunteering yet, but I maybe yes.
For feedback, and everybody's just like, yeah, I'm real busy right now with the campaign. So, maybe after the election. But yeah, like I get a lot more like, yeah, that's great, and I would like more. I found this useful, but I didn't find this useful, or I found this confusing, like you didn't express that very clearly, or like, I love criticism. Like I'm not going to get better with that criticism.
Exactly.
So, and if anybody just wants to discuss like brainstorming, or, if you want to just say like, we're going to get together for an hour and just like brainstorm on whether or not we think this, way of, whether we think that this is a useful way of talking about this particular topic. So like, anything, it's all productive. It's all really productive. More
we did an office hours one time.
All by myself. So
yeah, we did an office hours, one of these webinars once, kind of along that line. Let's talk about some things, kind of leaving it open. So
yeah. But yeah, feel free to look at my newsletter, object to something, challenge what I'm saying, ask a side question, send me something you're working on, and say, how does this apply? Like, or just say my local committee, could use something that looks like this, that would be practical for us, anything like that. I would love to hear.
And I'll reiterate, yeah, it is so helpful. Like I say, we miss getting that feedback that we used to get all the time, and it literally every single time. And I use literally, not like it's used a lot now, which is like for whatever you want it to mean. Every single workshop we did, we looked at the evaluation forms and found something in there that we'd missed or that could be done better, that somebody'd point out. Sometimes they'd be nice about it. They'd some go, why didn't you do this? But all valuable, and it changes what we do, because we're thinking about what we think is useful. But when you're on the ground, you're out talking to voters, you're talking to your volunteers, you're in your organizations, things are different. And so please, yeah, get that information coming. Well, thanks for coming. If this last one for a little bit here, just want to say, we really, really appreciate everybody who comes. We've made some really wonderful friends over the last few years, and we will all party again in January. If not before, if we find something that looks like fun to do between now and then, we'll do it. We'll let you know. So, and in the meantime, we'll continue to send some things out. Our emails, I would like to make our emails more informative. They were for a while, and then we kind of just have them as announcements for the meetings coming up. We'd like to send a little bit more out to you, along with resources from other sources. As we've always said, and Tony's been frequently here, and Hobie Stocking and some others, and having other, learning this in other ways, all it does is expand the way that you think about things. So, I really think that's important. So with that, maybe I'll say goodbye to everybody and have a great election.
Yeah, have a great election, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
connectionslab.org